are back on the 0 Hour. This is, as always, your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Millions of people around the world and in this country are breathlessly awaiting news of whether we are going to have and when we are going to have a vaccine for COVID 19. But there are some other people in this world who seem to be more concerned with when big pharma companies will be able to make billions of dollars from a COVID 19 vaccine, regardless of that profiteering's impact on the health of others. So, with that rather opinionated introduction, allow me to introduce my next guest. She's been on the program before. Merith Basey is the executive director of Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, UAEM. And I saw that Merith recently posted something in the Hartford Courant. In time of crisis, Yale University makes sure drug makers deliver high profits to shareholders. So it was so good, I wanted to talk to Merith about it. So Merith Basey, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be back.
And for those who occasionally text me or hit me up on social media to say, why don't you ever spell the names of your guests so we can find them? Merithbasey, Merith Basey. So always good to talk to you. And I'll let you describe the article, since perhaps my rhetoric might be too heated even for you. So tell me.
No, go. You could try. Well, so a couple of weeks ago, on the day that we crossed a very macabre milestone in the pandemic, we hit 500,000 deaths worldwide. I came across an article that was calling out to Universities Allied for Essential Medicine and Doctors Without Borders for saying that we were concerned about profiteering from big pharma around COVID, and that there was no evidence to suggest that big pharma or patents played a role in preventing access to medicines. And so obviously this is a complete myth. And I was outraged and appalled, not only that he called out, and I should say that he in this article is the Director of Technology Transfer at Yale University. And he shared only a tiny piece of the origin story of UAM, our organization, that 20 years ago, students on the campus helped lower the price of a life-saving HIV drug that had been developed with public funds on the campus. And he suggested that the pharmaceutical corporation who had the license did this basically because they just felt like doing it, and that's the way that the world works. But he missed some really key facts, which is without that public pressure, they would never have lowered the price, and they changed the license to a non-exclusive license, which allowed for generic competition for this drug. And it's not a dissimilar moment that we're living in right now in many ways, I think, with the COVID pandemic. And so we were pretty outraged to read this, and the Pharma Lies linked to this, and felt that we had to respond. And that's what the article was.
Well, I think you did a great job of it. If anything, though, Merith, you were too polite, if I may.
Please, your show.
So first of all, well, I'm the guy who thinks that pharma executives who push OxyContin should have their houses impounded and used for rehab centers. So,
it's a great idea.
John, that's mine. I am going to push that again. John Soderstrom is the individual involved, Yale, and his official title is he is Yale University's Director of University Technology Commercialization. So, I mean, I haven't looked him. I read his article as well. I haven't looked him up personally or, where he's coming from. But it seemed to me, reading his article, that he cherry picked whatever he could. Mm-hmm. There was scarce information really to back up his point of view. So the only person he could use to validate try to validate his argument with was Dr. Fauci, who was expressed some skeptical thoughts about reining in profits or whatever. But Dr. Fauci is not a policy expert in this area. He's not an economist. He's not but he couldn't cite any studies. He couldn't cite any facts. He couldn't study the history. So I guess I wonder, first of all, I don't know if you know, Merith Basey, what a director of university technology commercialization actually does for a living, but it seems to me that perhaps this individual's job involves maintaining friendly relations with companies, and therefore perhaps this was buttering them up or something. I don't know, because it didn't seem to have a rational basis to it, but I was disturbed to see an educational institution's name associated with that.
Yeah, well, sadly, there are many universities who are acting more similarly or in line with the comments that he's made in that article, rather than making sure that publicly funded life-saving medicines that are developed on university campuses are accessible and affordable to the public, which is all of us who paid for these innovations. And I think that's what this gets to, the heart of it, right? Like whether it's COVID, whether it's HIV, whether it's TB, the US taxpayer in particular is funding most of this research and development into our most essential medicines. And yet 1 in 3 Americans cannot afford to pay for their prescription drugs, which is outrageous. And just across the border in Canada, they also happen to have the second highest price medicines in the world, but they just look comparatively cheaper because of the proximity with the US, are 40% lower. And 1 in 3 people in this country not paying for their medicines is entirely unethical, immoral, especially when you know that we funded them in the first place. But also that was pre-COVID. So, people now are trying to struggle to pay for their rent, pay for medicine, pay for food. There's no social security system at the level we need yet to be able to support these individuals. And yet universities that are supposed to have these very lofty moral goals about, knowledge and sharing for the public good are failing us at a time of crisis. And Yale needs to be called out, and other universities need to do better and lead and basically commit their intellectual property on things, innovations for things like COVID for free, because they are going to be a barrier to access like they were in the HIV crisis and have been since. So these individuals, to answer your question about what they do, the idea is that they're supposed to manage the patenting and licensing of anything discovered related to medicines on the campus to corporations. But of course, if those licenses are not socially responsible, then what happens? We're going to see price gouging of medicines to the American taxpayer and also to people around the world as well who need access.
So Merith Basey, what's so interesting to me about this, and your organization is in a way perfectly situated. It seems to me to be, it's occurring at the intersection of two forces, right? Which is, your organization is Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, right? And the two ends of your name, Universities of Medicine. It's fascinating to me and critically important to me that people understand that, at least in my view, the effect of all the profit taking on the part of the pharmaceutical companies is affecting the process, the entire healthcare research, from research to medical care and delivery. In a way, in my view, it's distorting the whole process. Yeah. Whether doctors being given incentives to, to prescribe certain medications, however indirect, or whether it's universities, in this case, that are being given an incentive to help their professors perhaps make a profit off medications they've developed through public grants. This is a very complex weaving web of forces that I think are undermining public health around the world. But what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what people don't realize is, first of all, the public pays for most of the R&D, right? So $41 billion of US taxpayer money goes from NIH, the National Institutes of Health, not far away here in Washington, D.C. in Bethesda, to over 2,500 universities and publicly funded research institutes to do research, all the way from basic research through to clinical trials. So about 1/3 of that $41 billion goes to clinical trials every year at universities, right? And yet also 1 in 2 clinical trials globally are not registered and reported. So that's another challenge. Right. But I think the only people who are benefiting from this current system, the way that we make medicines, the R&D, biomedical R&D system, is shareholders. Like nobody else. Like you can see that with COVID. People everywhere, in every single country, are suffering right now. So you cannot say that this has been a great success, right? And we just see some of the other failures, not just high drug prices. We see that there's a lack of investment into neglected diseases that mostly affect the poor and people of color around the world. And we haven't really seen a new antibiotic. And we've seen one in about 30 years. And that's the big fear, that we're going to have another pandemic, which is stemming from sort of antibiotic or antimicrobial resistant bacteria. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's, there are all of these failures. But there are alternatives to these systems as well, which, there are some models that do exist, and we are looking into those too. But universities play a critical role, and we need to see them show up in ways that they are not, because they're behaving like corporations. They are going after that dollar rather than thinking about the public good, which is what they were set up originally for.
I couldn't agree more. And also for the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake, yes, and not for profit's sake, so that we don't need another minor molecular tweak of a popular medication that's already doing its work so that it can be copied, patent protected, and the generic can be shot out of the water or whatever. This is all. And the antibiotic, to me, is a perfect example of that, because the overprescription of antibiotics is contributing to that. Prescribing them for viral rather than bacterial, which in turn is exacerbating the problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, the problem is, and it's radical by some views, but the problem is profit taking in the mm-hmm. pharmaceutical and medical spheres. So I know what my solutions are, but what do you think is the right way to address this?
So first of all, for the pandemic, for right now, universities, I don't think anyone should be profiteering in this pandemic, right? We all want this to end. We want lives to be saved. We want treatments to arrive, but universities should not be trying to patent their life-saving innovations because we know that that's going to be a barrier to access. So we are pushing through a campaign right now called Free the Vaccine. We are urging universities to basically pledge all of their intellectual property for free through something called the Open COVID Pledge. And we expect and urge universities to take this leadership, but they're not doing it without some encouragement, sadly. But in our opinion, this is a critical moment in history. They need to start here, and it should go beyond just for COVID, but we'll take COVID for now. Let's take those diagnostics, treatments, and the eventual vaccine when it eventually arrives, and assuming that it is safe and effective. We need it to be accessible and affordable for everyone everywhere. That includes regardless of immigration status, regardless of insurance status, people need to be able to access this at zero cost. And it's not free because we already paid for it with our taxpayer dollars, right? So you see a lot of the press right now is saying not-for-profit vaccine, but it's not true, because the public has invested billions of dollars, $6 billion already into these potential solutions. So that is the starting point. And we hope that we're organizing in 29 different countries right now, not just here in the US, to urge universities, public research institutions to pledge their IP for the duration of the pandemic. And it's the least they should be doing. You see this with newspapers. They're giving away their articles for free because it's the right thing to do around COVID. This is what universities should be doing. They shouldn't be just feeding the shareholders' profits at this time in history.
Well, I think that's a fantastic campaign, and closely linked to it, to me, is they should be sharing information too. I mean,
absolutely.
We keep hearing these stories. Well, we think maybe Russia or China are spying on our COVID. Well, why aren't we sharing that?
Why the hell not?
Everybody?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think what COVID has done is shed light for a lot of people who have not been exposed to these inequities around access to medicines in this country or around the world, to see that this system has failed. The way that we make medicines has failed, and that it's time for new people-centered alternatives that are needs-driven, not profit-driven. And one of those key principles, as you said, is collaboration and sharing. Like, we're all on the same planet. We're all driving for a solution, and it's going to have to be a global one. And what if China, what if Russia, what if some other country that is not a friend of the US comes up with the vaccine first? Like, what happens then? We need to be sharing. It's the most effective and efficient way to be getting to that solution, which is where we all want to be, to save lives ultimately, which I think is what this is all about in the end.
Well, I can't think of a better way to conclude than that. So, Merith, where can people go to find out more about what you're doing?
Thanks. Yes, you can go to freethevaccine.org. And we're actually going to be recruiting next month for people to join us in the US and around the world. And there'll be an application. It's open to all. You can be, as our youngest participant is 14, and currently our most senior is 72 years old. So we have a range of folks who are organizing to help urge universities to help ensure that everything that they're developing on these university campuses will be accessible and affordable to everyone who needs it everywhere. So that would be a great step.
Well, why don't you let us know when that launches, and we'll have you back to talk about it further. So Merith Basey, Executive Director of, I'm going to get this right, Universities Allied for Essential Medicine. Was that right?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your great work as always. And thanks as always for coming on the program.
Great to see you. Thank you so much again, and see you soon. Take care.
Yeah, look forward to it. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and you're listening to The Zero Hour.